Space, the final frontier. We're back for one big week, but don't worry, we'll talk about when you can find us again. But yes, Star Trek Weekly is back. We have so much to talk about. Frank and I could not wait for Discovery to return. We had to talk about Picard. Where was that? Nobody knew that was coming. There's a lot of great news about Discovery, and then also the movies. Without Chris Pine? We'll find out. Star Trek Weekly starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Oh, what a great feeling it is to hear that music again.
Yes.
I was just telling Frank, since the last time we did the show, I haven't watched anything Star Trek. So I haven't heard this music in so long. It's been playing in my head ever since I've been reading about all the Picard stuff. But just very excited to be able to share some of this great Star Trek news with Frank Moran.
There you go. Yes, it's the song is like a hello old friend moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I am Christian Bladt, as I always like to tell you. I am and always shall be your friend, and we're so happy to have an excuse to talk Star Trek. There's so much Star Trek to talk about, and as I already teased twice, we will talk Picard. But let's start off with Star Trek Discovery, because there is so much Star Trek Discovery news that some of it isn't news, but it's like they used to say on NBC about the reruns. If you haven't seen it, it's new to you.
That's right.
So we haven't been here to talk about it, so it's news for us. So obviously, no secret, very well known, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it, is that Star Trek Discovery has announced that Captain Pike will be played by Anson Mount, who I think is a great actor. He was on a show called Hell on Wheels, and I am in a very small minority of people who found any enjoyment in the Inhumans TV series. But I would say that even people who didn't like it, they tended to not point to him. He had a pretty tall order. He was not allowed to make any noises because his character on the Inhumans Black Bolt would literally have destroyed the whole Earth if he yelled. So what do you think about the casting, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, and of course we've got Crossroads as well with Britney Spears.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. I don't know why I didn't start with that. We should open with a Britney song.
That's
now,
right.
You know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to close with a Britney song.
That's right.
Dealer's choice, whatever you want to play from the booth. We'll go out with a Britney song.
I'm not a girl, not yet a woman. I think that
I would see it. Well, it's whatever. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. Okay.
That's that great Crossroads song. I've watched that movie. I'm not gonna be ashamed to admit that. I like it. You know, it's he's got that Christopher Pike-ness. A lot of you can kind of see like that similarity to Bruce Greenwood.
Yeah, and it's sort of just like the eyes. There is a Jeffrey Hunter quality.
Yep.
Yeah, I knew a lot of people who were hoping that it would be Bruce Greenwood. And, there was no real reason why it shouldn't have been. But I think that if you're running the show, you kind of have your own idea for who Captain Pike should be. So you're probably going to cast somebody else.
I feel like certainly, yeah, it would be cool, but just because it's a nice nod. But I think it feels like the films that they've been doing now with the J.J. Abrams verse here.
Yeah.
I feel like they are their own entity. So
yeah.
Whoever they want to cast for whatever roles, that's why you don't have Zachary Quinto come and play Spock for
Right,
this.
exactly. I mean, once that happened, I think people started to think like, all right, so we're not going to see Zachary Quinto. Look, in the J.J. Abrams verse, Khan is Sherlock Holmes. So
Yes.
once you do that, you're like, okay, clearly everything is just thrown out the window. So, I think it's a great choice, and you started getting some rumblings that apparently the crew of Discovery is going to not trust Captain Pike. Now, the one question is, and if we could bring back the image that we have of him for those watching on YouTube, it's interesting because he is in the yellow, the gold, the traditional Star Trek, the original series uniforms. There are a couple of ways that I would have expected him to be dressed. One would be like the way that I am for those watching on YouTube, like the way that the Discovery crew is dressed, or what Frank and I were hoping for is the way that they were dressed in the pilot, the cage,
Yes.
with the little turtlenecks and the velour uniforms. But that is not what they have. So what do you think the reasoning is for this? Because it's Star Trek, they will definitely tell us why. They will not just assume that we wouldn't notice, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough one. I feel like if they're doing this, they're probably going for the widest possible net, where if
Yeah.
everybody's thinking Star Trek, you're normally going to be associating it with this costumes. Only the real true diehard Trek fans are going to think, oh, wait, let's go back to the cage where they're wearing the
Yeah.
sweet turtlenecks. So I feel like they're targeting to this, but I also feel like this show has been smart enough to at least explain, or at least with a quick line or something, why it is to some of the diehards, about as to why it's this and not what you've always thought has been canon throughout these years. So I do like this, but I also like that they've kind of addressed some of the concerns that we talked about before we wrapped up the show with Discovery. Is how are they going to treat it once they meet the Enterprise in terms of going back to a 60s aesthetic, but you're shooting it now with modern effects, modern technology as well. And so I like they strike a nice balance where you get the look and feel and the vibe of the original costume, but it's been slightly updated to kind of have more of a more, I guess, like current aesthetic.
Yeah, and look, I think we all understand that you're not going to get spitting image of what they would look like. When we were doing Star Trek Weekly, when we did the Mirror Universe episodes, the one thing that they had done really nicely on Enterprise was sort of like a somewhat updated, older vessel. We got to kind of see it. And, they created it, even that was 10 years ago, more, maybe 14 years ago. And they did a good job sort of having it, look good for HD TV, but still capture the spirit. So I think that people are willing to, as long as it looks cool and they're able to have it be inspired. I just wonder, are we going to see much of the Enterprise, or are they going to really hold that back? Is it going to be, he's going to come aboard? Nah, the Enterprise is out there, but are they going to make us wait to see the inside of the Enterprise? I think they are.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the toughest thing too, is that once you do decide you want to bring in the Enterprise, which is kind of a double-edged sword, because people watching the show want to see, if you're setting it in that time period, what is the Enterprise up to?
Yeah.
But then once you introduce the Enterprise, does it become so overwhelming that you have to work really hard to not gravitate towards, oh my gosh, the Enterprise, that's a really cool, shiny object. Should we start moving towards that? No. It's supposed to be Discovery.
Yeah. And in the chat, thank you, Star Drew and Lauren Ashendorf. Star Drew says, do not play a Britney song at the end. Well, you make up such a large part of our chat. It would be hard to disagree with that request, but I don't know. I still kind of want to hear some Britney. But anyway, so I think it's interesting, and I'm just looking forward to having them explain it. Now, the other big Star Trek Discovery casting was, there was a little rumbling towards the end of, after that great season finale, whether or not we were going to see Spock. And I think there would have been, I think we definitely talked about it on the show. I would have been disappointed if we didn't see him at all. But they went far enough that they announced that actor Ethan Peck, who is, I believe, the grandson of Gregory Peck.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all I really know about him, is that he's Gregory Peck's grandson. So Atticus Finch's grandson will be playing Mr. Spock. And for those watching on YouTube, you have a great look at him and you go, you know what? He's got the dark hair. He's got the right kind of eyebrows. Nobody's going to fit into the role, obviously, apart from Leonard Nimoy. But, nobody's going to replace the role better than Zachary Quinto, who just looked so much like him. I almost feel like they couldn't even consider casting anyone else. But I think he looks like a good Spock to me. We'll see how his acting in the role is. But what do you think about the choice? Yeah, this is really all we have to go on, is just what he looks like here.
Yeah, and of course, at least from what I had read, is that sure, Spock's going to be in, but he's not going to be in as quickly as we'd love for him to be in. So it's going to be seeing Pike in the Enterprise first. Spock's going to be away momentarily at the beginning, and then he's going to come in at some point during the course of the season. So, which makes sense. You already saw the photos and stuff of Ensign Mount in costume and all that stuff for anything that they're getting ready to shoot for promotional stuff, or at least even starting some of the second season. So the fact that they had waited so long for Star Trek for Spock casting, it definitely syncs up with what they're saying. Like, oh yeah, Spock's going to be away at the beginning, and he'll come later in.
Right, exactly. And I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be great to see him. And we're getting some insider information from the booth that might dishearten young Star Drew, but who's staying up so nice and late to watch the show with us, which we really appreciate. Now, the entire cast of Star Trek Discovery, including Ethan Hunt, that's Mission Impossible. Ethan Peck would be great. What a great crossover that would be. Ethan Hunt's next mission to break into the Enterprise. Ethan Peck, they'll be headed to New York Comic Con in a few weeks. I believe that's the weekend of October 14th or 12th, whatever that is. So I think we'll probably get some more news about Discovery then. We don't have a premiere date. I was reading an article that for some reason they assumed it was January. I don't know what that is based on. I would love for it to be January. Ever since season 1 ended and they were just so vague about everything, I always figured it was going to be well more than a year. But as soon as we find out when it is, we'll make sure we let everybody know. Don't worry, we'll be back. And we'll be sure to cover that show.
Well, we also have Rebecca Romaine as number 1.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I did want to get to that. And so we have Mystique as number 1. So who knows? Maybe that's just one of the shapes that she has shifted into. And number 1, when we looked at the cage, we talked a lot about that character. So I think it'll be really interesting to sort of see them give a modern interpretation of number 1. And it was sort of like supposed to be this very like independent, strong woman, but because of the just sort of the social mores of the 60s, it came off as like so sexist,
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they update that. But so yeah, Rebecca Romaine. I did almost call her Rebecca Romaine Stamos.
I know.
That's a very long time since she's been Rebecca Romaine Stamos. But go ahead.
It does seem, at least I can see why people are assuming January. I would think maybe February because I know they're doing those mini episodes and they're once a month starting in October.
Yeah, October 4th is the first one, and they're each going to be about 15 episodes. And have to see if our CBS All Access account is active here at AfterBuzz. Because if it isn't, then I'll just have to, I guess, watch them right before the show comes back. But yeah, so they've said there's going to be 4. So let's count October, November, December, January. So yeah, February would make perfect sense. My birthday's February 8th. So I mentioned that because if anyone's listening, go ahead and do it that weekend.
That's right. There you go. A special birthday gift to Christian.
Yeah, just and if you want to do it Netflix style and just drop them all, that's not how they roll. But if they want to, that would be great. Let's see. And there was one other thing that's not really news about Discovery, but Michael Dorn, Mr. Worf, was quoted from a convention where he said he's very glad that he's not playing a Klingon from Discovery because the prosthetics are so much more than what he was used to, which of course was in itself so much more than the original series Klingons had to go through. It's probably comparable to what Christopher Lloyd had to put on for Star Trek 3, but I just like that he weighed in on that. You know, Michael Dorn's like, yeah. And I don't know quite how old he is, but he's probably in his 50s, maybe almost 60 at this point, Michael Dorn. So he probably doesn't want to go through all that anyway.
No, I don't. I mean, I would feel like you would if you're a hungry young actor.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, I will go through the hours and hours of makeup and prosthetics necessary to make me into a Klingon. But, any seasoned actor that's been around for a while, they're like, I don't know, I'm good. I'm good. I don't need to sit around in that chair for that long of a time.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the one other news-related thing for Discovery was that there was yet another shakeup behind the scenes with changing showrunners. And so there's always something that seems to slow down the process. And in some ways, you feel like the show has so much stacked against it. But for those of you who watched Star Trek Weekly when we were covering Discovery, I really liked it. I thought it was one of the better shows, just period, that I've watched in the last few years. One of the best Star Trek shows that I've seen. And for me, it was just the premiere alone, I said, was the best premiere since Deep Space Nine. I had to remember which one I said. Because I was going to say, did I say Next Generation? Because if you want to be honest, Counter Farpoint, not a great premiere.
No, the scene that always sticks with me over that is just Jonathan Frakes skipping across, and then they're doing the whistling with him and Data. Oof.
I forgot. Yeah, there's some cringeworthy moments. So for those of you watching live in the chat, let us know what you're thinking about sort of all of this Discovery news. And if you are watching the archive version, go ahead and leave a comment. I will check back. We'll interact. And we'll give you our Twitter handles at the end here, so you can always interact with us. We're always happy to respond to any questions or comments about Trek news. And during the sort of break that we've had so far in this show, Star Trek Weekly, people would say like, well, what do you think about this? And usually I don't think there's anything that I haven't been excited about.
Yeah.
I guess we can transition to something that is potentially not exciting, so we're going to close the door on Discovery for now. Now we're going to move universes to the J.J. Abrams verse for a moment here, because the next film, which I guess we can call Star Trek 4, but it's hard to call it Star Trek 4 because Star Trek 4 is the voyage home.
That's right.
So, the fourth Abrams Trek, Bad Robot 4, I don't know what to call it, but they seemed to have a story that was all planned out, which was going to bring back Chris Hemsworth as Kirk's father, and there was going to, and we had talked about the idea of sort of closing the time loop that created this sort of alternate time that was the J.J. Abrams verse. And then, lo and behold, there were some contract negotiations. I'm going to assume, I'm just guessing, this is just conjecture based on nothing. You bring in a movie star like Chris Hemsworth, he expects to be paid a certain amount. And then when you're Chris Pine and you're Captain Kirk in a Star Trek movie, you probably also expect to be paid a certain amount. And he's been in some other movies, varying degrees of success, but he gets other work. So he's holding out is what it really comes down to. And they said that negotiations have ceased, but that in itself is a negotiating tactic. Carl Urban recently told an interviewer that he thinks that Chris Pine will return. William Shatner, the real James T. Kirk himself, said that he supports what Chris Pine is doing because he's Captain Kirk. Of course, he deserves to be paid more.
Of course.
And I heard an interview where he said that he's great in the role, but he'd never actually seen any of the movies. So that God love Shatner. He's always trying to figure it out. What do you think about making one of these movies without Chris Pine? Would they go forward and have no Captain Kirk in a Star Trek movie?
I don't think they would, especially if the idea for this film is that they want to.
Right. Well, you'd have to do a totally different movie.
Yeah, and I just don't know if they've already kind of committed to going down this road.
Yeah.
So it feels like at some point they're going to have a meeting of the minds and come out with some kind of middle point that everybody's going to at least be somewhat happy.
Right. And I think that the problem for Paramount, the movie studio, is that Star Trek Beyond didn't do the kind of numbers that they were hoping for. So you don't have as much leverage as, if, say, your previous movie was Infinity War, and you were like, look at all the money you made. So how about me? So it'll be interesting. I can't imagine them having it without the character of Kirk. I'd be really hesitant to recast him though, and have I think that that ensemble cast really works together very well. Obviously, Anton Yelchin passed away after the filming of Star Trek Beyond. My assumption there would be just you wouldn't have a Chekhov. I don't see why you would recast the character. Captain Kirk, it's really hard to do this. If they're gung-ho in making this movie and Chris Pine is just looking for way too much money, I guess they're going to have to make it without him. And I will still see it. But I will think all the way into the movie that it's not a good idea to do it without that. Star Drew says he needs to watch Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond, I did not think was bad. I thought it was really fun. And the way I remember describing it after I saw it was that, it kind of felt like there had been an ongoing Star Trek series with that cast, but I'd fallen behind and missed like a season, and I just kind of jumped in for this big 2-part episode. Some people would see that as a negative, but to me, I was just like, oh, it's great, just more adventures. I like that cast. I thought it was fun. So I would say, yeah, definitely check out Star Trek Beyond. I don't know. What do you think, though? Do you think that this will happen without him, or are they just gonna keep it in a holding pattern until they can work it out?
I think it'll happen with him, and they'll figure out some way to make it happen.
I do too.
But I also feel like Paramount they must be so frustrated because I feel like they haven't been able to find a way to capitalize on Star Trek the way they would like to. In terms of they would like this to become their which all intents and purposes are a big franchise. They wanted it to be like their Star Wars, their MCU, something like that for Paramount. And when the first J.J. Abrams film came out, that seemed to give it a nice shot in the arm. People were like, all right, the recasting, we're on board with it. We'll go for it. And I felt like it was Star Trek Into Darkness that kind of cut the wind out of their sails there.
Yeah, I think that really, they're critically, I think financially the movie did well, but critically it was not well received, and fans had a lot of problems with it. Just Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan was a big problem for a lot of people. He's a great actor. I think it was an odd choice just because of the ethnic background of the character and all of that.
And it felt like the repetitive nature of Kirk's story.
Yeah,
kind of recycled it from the first.
And that I think bothered a lot of people was sort of the way that they co-opted dialogue from the original Star Trek too. I think that there were a lot of things that they did that they should have known would bother people, but I don't know, maybe they just didn't care at that point. So let us know what you think about this. There's no real timetable on when they were trying to get this movie out for, at least as far as anything that I read. But I think you're right. I think that they will figure it out, whatever he's asking for. Excuse me. He's probably going to get close to it. He'll get a producer credit so you can shift the money around. There's probably some pet project that he's wanted to do for a long time. And they'll be like, all right, let's go ahead and, give that to him.
He requested to direct Star Trek V.
Which, by the way, this was not on my list for stuff for us to talk about, but he said this since we did our last show. William Shatner said he regrets directing Star Trek V. Yep. So when I read that, what I wrote on Twitter was, oh, now that makes all of us. And I haven't seen Star Trek V in so long. And I guess one of the reasons why it's good that we put this show on a hiatus was because I knew we were going to get to a Star Trek V episode soon. And I should give it a fair chance at some point. But there's just so much tonally wrong with that movie. And just trying to be slapstick comedy and, I don't think it's all Shatner's fault though.
No,
he didn't write the script, but imagine if he had. Just imagine if Bill Shatner wrote that script. Anyway, so I think that what we now want to focus on for a little bit is something that I never imagined was going to happen, which is the idea of a Picard series featuring Jean-Luc Picard as an older man, played by Sir Patrick Stewart. I almost left off the sir. Imagine if I had done that.
You worked hard for that, sir.
It would have been so disrespectful. And one of the things most exciting about this for both Frank and myself, I'll speak for you on this.
Please do.
It is going to be set in the time after Star Trek Nemesis. This elusive period of time that we have never seen any stories set. So before we just dive into the little bits and pieces that we know, Frank, just talk about your reaction when you heard about this.
That was one of those, I guess you'd heard some of the articles were like, hey, yeah, we're kind of exploring other possibilities for other series for CBS All Access. And you're like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And then and that had kind of been simmering around for a long time. And then when they finally just, boom, dropped, like, hey, guess what? One of them's going to be with Patrick Stewart reprising Jean-Luc Picard. How could you not be excited about that?
Yeah, because there had been this idea that he'd be open to playing Picard in this rumored Quentin Tarantino written and directed Star Trek movie. And that was kind of the first time we'd heard in a long time that he would be interested in returning to the character. And that certainly opened my expectations. So if this had come before that, I'd been like, wait, he said he was never going to do it again. So just this idea that we would have him back as Picard is very exciting, very smart for CBS All Access, by the way, because I think you would consider Discovery as a success, but this is kind of a slam dunk, you know, for people who are, maybe a little bit more tangentially Star Trek fans, not diehard Trekkies or Trekkers. It's just like, oh, I loved Star Trek: The Next Generation, and people love Sir Patrick Stewart. He's the the lovable goofball boss of the FBI on American Dad, you know? So everybody loves him. So I think that I don't know, I think it's a smart idea, and they're obviously very much in the early stages because it was earlier this week. Well, this is Tuesday, so it was last week, I guess, that they tweeted out a picture from the writer's room.
Yep.
And what they explained is, oh yeah, they're just in the idea stage. You know, this is this is after his time on the Enterprise. You know, there's so much you can do with that. You know, do you want to do a story where he's like a hermit, you know, and he doesn't have much contact with anyone in the outside world? Could something have happened that maybe his time at Starfleet does not end well? I would hate for them to do that to the legacy of his character, but it would be well serviced by Sir Patrick Stewart. What are some of the things that you would hope to see? You know.
Well, I guess the one thing about this is, like, as much as I love Jean-Luc Picard, he's fantastic. Do I want to see him in a vacuum? By which I mean, do I want to see him without any other characters that he's kind of worked alongside in The Next Generation? And not necessarily that they have to be full-on co-stars with him, but am I going to see some of the interaction from previous cast members? I feel like I would want to see that.
Yeah, it's like Frasier, you know, in the early seasons. There was an episode with Woody. There was an episode with Sam. And you're like, yeah, I kind of want to see him interact with them. And I think if really anyone from the original cast was a regular and on every episode, it would just seem unlikely. It's like, you're people who served together and you went through a lot. And I think that he, you know, as the series grew on, and especially the film series, he grew to be friends with these people. But I don't think that it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna retire to the Village's assisted living community together, you know, Riker and myself. So I'd like to see them, but yeah, I would say if, you know, say it's like a 13 episode season, if like maybe towards the end of the season you get one or two people, and would they go small? You know, would they just like, well, look, it's Ensign Rowe. You know, it's like
still an ensign too.
Yeah, it just never really got past it. Yeah, exactly. Guinan, I'd be on board with that. I think that would be fun because, you know, she's just someone who, you know, transcends time, or at least she's old enough. She wouldn't have to really, you know, just Whoopi Goldberg, just put on a funny hat.
Yeah,
we'd be ready for her. I think it would be great, and you're starting to get some responses from people from the cast who are saying that they weren't asked to be on the show. And the show's still in the very early planning stages. So any of them, Marina Sirtis and Gates McFadden, Michael Dorn, those are the ones that I've seen say that they have not been invited. But that doesn't mean that they won't.
No, I feel like there has to be a yet at the end of that sentence.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then also, if they were invited and going to be a part of the show, they would probably be told, yeah, you can't say anything. So yeah, there's also that part of it, you know.
Well, I mean, certainly, at least in the novels, and if we're treating that, I mean, Star Trek as a universe at whole kind of likes to treat their novels as part of the canon. But, you know, it's always kind of loosey-goosey in terms of, you know, the live action, how often they want to adhere to that. But Picard and Crusher are married in the novels. So will they, so if anybody, if they wanted to adhere to at least that kind of semblance of thought, then I feel like Gates McFadden would at least show up, if not have at least a name check.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with Star Trek in particular, I mean, I believe it was Gene Roddenberry was the one who said that he always saw the movies and TV as Star Trek fact, and then the novels and comics were Star Trek fiction, and you're sort of getting the opportunity. But people, especially Star Trek fans, just are so attached to the stories in the novels, especially because there are so many years without Star Trek being on television where the novels and comic books were all you were getting. So it would be interesting. And I don't think I knew that that is like a whole series where that happens. And Yeah, see, that shows how much reading I've done in the time. But I haven't even watched any Star Trek. But now I've got a hankering. I'm like, what am I going to go home and watch tonight? You know,
They have established in the novels, in terms of the human lifespan, by the time we get to the Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager time period, much more long lasting. So, they're living to like 150, 175 years old. So they, being, 70 years old is not considered kind of middle, kind of just in
well, that 70 might be middle aged because he could. And let's see, in the pilot, he's very old, but we see bones, and I forget, he was like 143 or something. It was somewhere in that range. So yeah, the idea that Picard is 70 is like, oh yeah, he's like, I can still be going on adventures, and I think what my expectation would be is that the show's going to start and he's definitely going to be past his time in Starfleet. I don't think he's going to be, called in for one more heist, basically one more mission or something. But I do think something will happen that he feels like he needs to travel off world, whatever world he happens to be living on. And I do think we'll get a little bit more space faring. Like, I don't think this is going to be Picard and his dotage, where
No.
he's like, oh yeah, I'm a handyman now, and I'll fix things, and you
I'm
can
just
bring him
a landscape
on
artist,
yeah, right, exactly.
groundskeeper for a very wealthy man.
Right.
Well, there's a couple episodes of Next Generation where they really dialed into his passion for archaeology and history.
That's true.
And they did some kind of spin-offs on that where it became kind of heists or stories that involved him, just kind of more focused on that as opposed to larger kind of Starfleet, missions of the week kind of thing. So maybe he leaves Starfleet and he's kind of more embraced that kind of part where he's just traveling around, exploring history and ancient civilizations, maybe.
Right. I think that would be very logical, and it's also sort of very deliberate, drawn out work that would probably appeal to him, after having been a Starfleet captain. We should assume that, he became an admiral at some point, and probably much like Kirk was like, I should have listened to him in Generations, don't let them promote me to admiral. And yeah, so we have a specific year, according to one of the show's producers, Michael Chabon, I don't know.
Yeah, from Cavalier and Clay.
23.99. So he had a fun post of an image from Space 1999 to sort of mention it, with of course Walter Matthau and Barbara Bain. So anyway, and then so the point in mentioning that is because when we saw Star Trek Nemesis, that year was 2379, which we usually don't talk about the years. It's usually stardate, but for our sake, it's helpful to know that yes, it is 20 years, and that's about right. I mean, by the time the show starts, it'll have been almost 20 years. So it's good that they're not trying to, do any kind of digital altering to Sir Patrick Stewart to make him look a little younger, to Grand Moff Tarkin him, or anything like that. So we'll be right at the end of the 24th century, which means you just get a second season. We'll finally get to the 25th century.
Right.
So,
well, when you see something like Logan and you get to see him kind of embrace kind of the end point of Professor Xavier's life, I could see people associated with Star Trek seeing that like, wow, seeing what he can kind of do, kind of playing the last days of Xavier. What would it be like to see him kind of reprise the role of Jean-Luc Picard, and what would that be like now? I don't know if that is something that kind of affected that decision, but I know certainly seeing that performance would be like, yeah, I'd love to see what else he would do if he had a chance to go revisit this old character.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably did have a lot to do with it, just sort of, and he wasn't away from playing Professor Xavier for nearly as long, but it was just such a great performance, just sort of, a way to really explore that character like he'd never really been explored in any media, really, even in comics, just getting the older version of him. So to do that for Picard would be interesting, but I think he's not going to be quite as far along,
No.
So
well, and he said that he wants this to be more of a something to kind of help people in this time right now, in the time of where we're at in our civilization, our society right now. So I feel like it's going to be a much more optimistic, hopeful Picard than as opposed to somebody that's been kind of beaten down as kind of very jaded and angry and a curmudgeon. So I feel like he wants to tell a story about a at least a Picard that whether that's the course of the season that is how Picard got his groove back,
Yeah.
maybe. But at least
I would hope there would be an episode called that. And by the way, Lauren Ashendorf, you're absolutely right. I don't know how I said Walter Matthau when I meant Martin Landau. I do know how because their names sound similar. But yes, Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, not Walter Matthau. But Walter Matthau in
interesting.
space, by the way, if he put together a space Bad News Bears or a space Odd Couple, I would have loved either of those movies. Really, anything. So in sort of predicting what they might want to see, Lauren Ashendorf says the opening shot, Picard on his brother's vineyard, would be kind of a nice way to open it, and then he's back to work doing some archaeology stuff. He also says, I'm thinking the Federation has fallen by some new enemy. Picard is a catalyst, maybe a renegade to try and mold a new Federation against this new enemy. I think something to that extent is probably about right. I mean, you could definitely have just some new enemy and, imagine the Federation at the end of the 24th century. Everyone is turned into the crew of the Enterprise B, basically. And so you need people with a little bit more skill, because if it's a time of peace for an extended period and, you maybe get softer, maybe you need Picard. So it'll be interesting. But I don't know. I just hope he gets called into some good action. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, two things I think if you're looking at Picard's character, if you're looking certainly the archaeology, the history, Shakespeare music, but if you're thinking about enemies, there's always the Borg, a common Picard nemesis. There's also Q.
Yep. Lauren actually literally just said, I hope Q makes an appearance. And
would you want to see either of those show up, or it's like, no, let's not revisit that well?
I think if the show goes on for a number of seasons, I think it would be very interesting. And anybody who watched Star Trek Weekly knows that I'm not a particularly huge Q fan, although I do like the way John Delancey portrays him. Believe it or not, that's how I feel. I just don't like the concept of the character. I would be very interested in seeing an older Picard and, Q just catching up with him. But say they only do like 13 episodes in the first season, I wouldn't want one of them to be those. But if there's a second season, we get to like 20 some odd episodes, I would be okay with that. The Borg, I think it might be interesting if you sort of have, like Hugh or Seven of Nine, someone who is sort of removed from a Borg colony, and it could, you have to feel like Picard will always have some kind of imprinting in his brain from having been part of the Borg hive. So it could be an interesting thing to explore. But again, it's not stuff that I need. You know what I mean? I think getting some personal stories early on, and then he better be in space by like the third episode. That's all I'm saying. It's he can just go onto another planet and have an adventure on a planet, but come on, we can't have him on a big dig and hanging out in the vineyard and all that stuff for too long.
No, because admittedly, the thing that you give, I know what excites me is that if we're in 2399, I want to see what the Starship vehicles are looking like. I want to see where the Federation is at 20 years.
What the phasers are up to, different way. I mean, what would they come up with in terms of communicators and things? Just because of the way our technology is advanced, I think people are going to think very differently. And I can't quite. I think there's a typo in Star Drew's thing, but you're absolutely right. There's no reason. We were only talking about the cast of Next Generation, but there's no reason that you couldn't have him meet up with Captain Janeway at some point if that was something that they wanted to do. I mean, she's busy with Orange is the New Black, but sure, they're in their last season. I'm not looking for that. I'm just saying I could see them making, that's like a season 5 sort of thing. If you're doing a lot of these and we get Geordi and we get Riker, who else do we want? It's hard to imagine getting Data at this point. I think, honestly, I love Brent Spiner. I think if you're going to have Data, you have to just have some explanation for like, this is the new model of Data. I am still Data, but I am played by a much younger actor. Just because, I mean, he even said that it's like, well, it's getting ridiculous, the idea. I mean, Data wasn't supposed to have his let's say body type change. I'm trying to be nice about it.
Yeah, that's
he should be I capable of that. He's not that human with the human surgeon.
I mean, you put on a lot of Spanx on Brent Spiner. We'll mold him in there. I felt like if we were gonna see that, then to see a Janeway, I feel like then that's when the show like jumps over and becomes fan servicey.
Yeah.
Ooh, cool. Yeah.
Right. I did like when you get things like the Doctor played by Robert Picardo from Voyager, when he showed up in a Next Generation movie, I liked that because it's like, oh, logically that makes sense because he's a program, and Lauren's pointing out that she was Admiral Janeway in Nemesis, and I believe she's also Admiral Janeway in All Good Things, the series finale of Next Generation, unless I'm mistaken. But
no, she wasn't in, because she doesn't show up in.
Oh, she's not in that.
No.
Okay, so again, I'm mistaken. Oh, that's right. I think I'm thinking of the Voyager finale. We know in that she's an admiral. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And then Lauren has a great question. We only have a few minutes, but I want to get some of these questions in here. Will the new show introduce a new Enterprise, and what letter would it be? So we left off with the Enterprise E, correct?
Yeah.
Or did we destroy it again at the end of Nemesis? I think
it'd been smashed up. It hadn't been destroyed.
Yeah, but I think that had they done another movie, we would have gotten the Enterprise F. I felt like it was. I felt like it was coming because one of the things that I don't like about the different iterations of Star Trek is they love the destruction of the Enterprise.
Yes.
It's like torture porn. Like they want to just show you the ship just getting beaten up, and like it was fitting to do it in Star Trek 3. But I don't think I've needed to see it anytime since then, But even in Star Trek Beyond, they wreck the Enterprise, so it's just like enough already. So, but let's see, 20 years. I think we would be to like H, maybe, because if you want to, you don't want to go too far beyond a 5-year mission with one of these,
Yeah.
I mean, the original Enterprise, the 1701-nothing, like that was decommissioned after, although, what was it, 10 years, I guess, technically? It was a little bit more than that because it was retrofitted for the motion picture. Yeah, no, we're going to break this down for 4 minutes. But anyway, I want to think about it. How long you can have a starship in service. I don't know, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 sounds like too many. So I think we'd probably be a G. And Star Trek does point out that they crashed the Enterprise D in Generations. Yes, that's where the E came from. Because they wanted to, honestly, they didn't want to have to dress up TV sets for too long. And by TV sets, I don't mean the sets you watch at home. I mean sets that were constructed for television to make them look good in movies. So that totally made sense. But again, I didn't need to see it. You could have just given us a new ship. Although watching what happened to the B was all right, I guess. Anyway, I don't know. Do you have a guess? This is such a silly topic, but I actually this is why I love Star Trek, because we're really like, no, what letter are we going to have? It's going to really matter. Yeah. I want to know if I'm right, if there's going to be a G on it.
I mean, I could see it either being a G or an H. I mean, the nice thing about it, if you set it to an H, immediately that becomes a point of time where everybody's going to focus on, oh, wow, those are cool stories that we can tell. New novelizations about the crews of the F and the G. What happened was that transition from when Picard all this way to H and whoever's running it now. So that opens up a lot of great stuff that authors can really drill into. Yeah. So I'm very excited about all of this stuff. And in the short term, we are going to have these mini episodes on CBS All Access of Star Trek Discovery. I'm not quite sure what they're going to entail. But we might do, one or two more of these, depending on how those episodes are. The mini episodes are well received. So just keep an eye on. You should of course subscribe. Oh, that's right. I didn't have Frank give the important message. You should subscribe to AfterBuzz TV Sci-Fi Fantasy and Superheroes, and Frank's going to tell you all about that. Well, yeah, because we've got a lot of AfterBuzz is awesome. We make a lot of great after shows for all these fantastic TV shows that we cover for you, the diehard TV fans. From, as Christian was saying, drama, reality TV, sci-fi, and more. No network is working harder to help you folks out, but we need your help now. So if you could subscribe to our one or more of our YouTube channels, and by doing that, YouTube will suggest content that's tailor-made for you, and you'll help AfterBuzz continue to grow. And if you're worried about those pesky notifications, you don't have to because they are optional. So hit that subscribe button now for this channel and check out all our other AfterBuzz TV channels as well. And let us know you did so in the comments, and we will do a colon-R ceremony in your honor. That's oh yes, we'll do that. We'll rid you of emotion for joining us. So for now, thanks for being the best fans and helping making us the ESPN of TV talk.
And Star Drew points out that the AfterBuzz TV Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Superheroes channel has 11,000 subscribers, which is second only to just the overall AfterBuzz one. So go TV, go Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Superheroes. Most of the shows that I do are on that channel. Some of them aren't, like the Trump Report, which is just on afterwards, but it feels like sci-fi and fantasy a lot of the time when you talk politics. And regardless of where you stand on any of the issues, it all feels like fantasy and sci-fi these days. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, this was so much fun to do. Frank and I had kind of been trading messages for a while. It's like, oh, there's so much to talk about.
Yes. And
there'll be more to talk about. So we'll come back before Discovery does. But if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. And thank you. And Frank, where do people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at HappyGoJackie. For example, like Patrick Peretta, who tweeted me last week, and I didn't get a chance to respond to him, asking me about any of the, since I read the Star Trek novels, any good Discovery novels. And for that, I would recommend Desperate Hours, written by David Mack. It kind of starts off a 4-part storyline right there. David Mack does a great job with Star Trek. Really gets into all the different characters from all the various different incarnations of the series. So check that one out, Patrick.
Yeah, and Star Drew had actually tweeted me earlier today wanting to know if Frank and I were going to be doing this special show tonight. And we have every expectation that Kari will be back with us in January. She's actually here in the building tonight, but she's busy doing another show, so it didn't quite work out. In any case, thanks so much. I love that we're getting this. Star Drew is probably stabbing knitting needles in his ears. Thanks again to everyone in the chat, to Frank, and of course to everyone here at AfterBuzz. We will see you soon. Until then, live long and prosper.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
That's for sure.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.